This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast.
Oh, man, that's gotta feel good.
I mean, it's just gotta.
Ooh, that's gotta make you feel good on a Friday.
Oh, yeah, baby. Thank you all so much for being here today. It is a pleasure and a joy to be bringing you today's episode. Please, if you're a fan of the show, rate, subscribe, leave a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us. Anything like that to help spread the word about the show would be much, much appreciated. You can also follow us on Instagram at Creep Street Podcast. Twitter, we're at Creep Street Pod. We're also on Facebook, and on our Facebook, we have a subgroup called Citizens of the Milky Way. And this is just a place where anyone can post memes, articles, funny stories, spooky stories, ask questions, anything like that. We highly recommend that you go ahead and check that out. Once again, that's called Citizens of the Milky Way.
Oh, yeah.
Now, here's the deal.
Spill it, Momo.
Okay. Creep Street Podcast comes out once a week.
That's right.
But sometimes once a week isn't enough.
Oh, it just ain't enough, friend.
Sometimes you need more.
Come on, cowboy.
Yep. You need that extra content, that little extra something, you know? Thank God we have the solution for you, because I don't know what you would do if, you didn't have the solution, but we've got it. So
I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, no, it would be
madness.
It would be mayhem. But the good news is you can head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. And there you are going to find all sorts of bonus content. We've got movie reviews, movie commentaries, short stories, interviews, full bonus episodes,
drink it in,
and so much more. We've got a $2 tier, a $5 tier, and a $10 tier, all billed monthly. So no matter what your budget is, we've got you covered, and we're gonna get you some of that extra content.
Oh, yeah.
Once again, you can check that out at patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. Now, last week we gave them a little bit of a weird one, kind of an interesting one.
We sure did, absolutely, and people really enjoyed it. They were very excited about it when it was.
Yes,
it was good times all around.
Yeah, we talked about the Dybbuk.
Yes, freaky stuff.
Very scary, and just kind of took you for a loop. It had a lot of twists and turns up in there.
Yes, it did.
So if you haven't listened to it yet, we recommend that you go ahead and check that out. But that's neither here nor there for today's episode. Dylan, what are we even talking about today?
Today, we are truly talking about some of the worst behavior imaginable. Folks, it's a dark one.
Yeah.
It's a dark one. Today, we are talking about the horrors of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. So, just so everyone knows, I was surprised by this. This is kind of a well-known haunted location in the United States. It's actually, the subject comes up a lot when people are talking about most haunted places.
Okay.
In the U.S. What's funny is it was briefly at the very beginning named the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, and then it was like the West Virginia Lunatic Hospital. Then it was like the Weston Hospital for the, it's had many names. I don't know why this one stuck, but I'm just calling it that because that's what it seems like most people know it as.
Right, right.
But let me butter you up and let me hit you with a little appetizer called Sources.
Oh, okay. I'm interested. I'm hungry.
I read 2 books. The first was called Lunatic, The Rise and Fall of an American Asylum by Edward Gleason. Next was Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, a short story by James Rose. And then an article called The Harrowing Haunted Insane Asylum of West Virginia by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. Now, like I said, when people talk about some of the most haunted places in the United States, this is always up there. It's very much like Pinhurst Asylum or one that we've done before, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Now, like these other places, the haunting was really only half the story. In fact, originally I was going to call this episode The Haunting of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, but I've decided to name it The Horrors of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum because it was the things that the living did there. In many ways, it really are far worse than many of the specters that are said to now lurk in the abandoned halls.
Yeah, we don't usually do listener discretion advised notices.
Yeah, we don't usually do those, but on this one, there's some stuff that's just kind of unsettling and just not pretty to think about.
Yeah.
So just, and I'll let you know when we start getting into the real dirty stuff. Just a fair warning.
Yeah.
So when the asylum first opened in 1864, it was built to hold 250 patients. But before it would close, there was a point where it contained over 2,000 people.
Oh my God.
Back in the early and mid 19th century, mental illness was considered a shame, really.
Yeah.
Often families who had a family member who was mentally ill, or it was considered a humiliation, and they were often sent away or hidden away from the world. In fact, many believed that the mental illness was even perhaps punishment for past sins, whether it meant to punish the person who was mentally ill or to punish the family. So really kind of a shitty way to look at it.
Yeah, it's so disgusting.
A woman named Dorothea Dix saw how many of these patients were treated and was deeply disturbed by it. One Sunday in 1841, Dorothea finished a Sunday school class she taught at a facility for the mentally ill in Massachusetts. Afterwards, she decided to have a look around the facility and was appalled by what she saw. For one, the heat inside the building was unbearable. And when she questioned a guard about the conditions, he replied that the mentally ill couldn't feel the heat.
I mean, I wonder, it's like, did that guard or did people actually believe that? Or is that just something they said to make themselves feel better, or they just didn't fucking care?
I know. That's a good question. It's like, were people truly that ignorant? That just seems so obvious.
Yeah.
Over the next couple of years, Dorothea would compile a report of the awful conditions the mentally ill were being kept in, and in 1843, she presented her report to Massachusetts lawmakers. What she exposed with her report led to the building of many facilities specifically for the mentally ill across the country. This movement eventually found its way to the Allegheny Mountains of Virginia when the state granted a man named R. Snowden Andrews, an architect, the funding to build a facility in the town of Weston. And the construction of this facility was based upon the design of a doctor named Thomas Kirkbridge. It actually became like a thing, like they call it like a Kirkbridge building. And what that means is it was how it was designed to treat the ill. So there would be a middle section, and this middle section would be offices, staff housing, kitchens, and then there would be long linear wings that would extend out from the sides, 2 of them, one on each side, right and left. Along these long hallways would be single patient rooms and common sitting room areas, etc. The plans were very detailed and emphasized good ventilation, heating, and sanitation, and even areas for patients where they could hold occupations and recreational areas and stuff like that. He also was firm in his belief that a facility should house no more than 250 patients, and that if more space was needed, an entire separate facility should be built.
Okay.
Well, construction officially began on March 22nd, 1858. The governor of the state had sent out associates to scout places to potentially build. And when the citizens of Weston heard about this, they went all in to spruce up the town to make it more attractive. The idea of the asylum being there meant jobs for the community. So homes and businesses were cleaned up, and even when the appraisers came to town, they were greeted by a parade of school children and a brass band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and of course, Weston was officially chosen, but Dorothy Dix was not so easily impressed. She ran a facility in Trenton, New Jersey, and it was kind of considered to be the ideal facility for the mentally ill. And the brass in the state of Virginia, because right at this time, West Virginia hasn't been created. West Virginia comes in pretty soon here, but when they were first building it was still technically Virginia. Well, the brass at Virginia wanted her approval, and so they asked her to go visit Weston to see for herself. And, well, no one told the citizens of Weston this, and after the inspectors left town, everything fell back into their natural state, which was not tidy. It said pigs would just run loose about town, scavenging garbage and just shitting all over Main Street.
Oh, yikes.
Dorothea was appalled by the place. She called the place nothing more than a, quote, one-wheelbarrow, one-horse town. It would actually take a few decades until the facility was completed, largely due to the Civil War. Now, during the Civil War, other stuff was happening there, but there was a time when the Union Army took up camp there. They stayed there. There was a few times where the Confederate Army raided the place. Just a lot happened within this time.
Yeah.
But the first patients to arrive at the asylum were admitted in October of 1864, and there was only 9 of them. According to the records, some of the listed reasons for their commitment to the asylum included domestic trouble and, quote, acute dementia. People were also apparently even committed for laziness and being greedy.
Oh, wow.
Things were just, there was not a lot of nuance back then. Even asthma, I think, was one. It was weird.
Yeah.
Weird shit. Once the war was over, finishing the asylum became the state's top priority. To this day, it is actually the largest hand-cut stone building in the country and the second largest in the world, second only to the Kremlin in Moscow.
Oh, wow. That's surprising.
At this time, many parts of the country were in financial woe in the aftermath of the Civil War. But Weston and the surrounding areas were not feeling that pain so much because the asylum had become a vital economic source for central West Virginia. And up until 1916, the asylum actually had the largest budget than any other entity in the state. So it was like a big deal.
Wow, yeah, for real.
In 1866, there were 45 patients residing in the southern wing of the asylum. The other parts of the building had yet to be completed at this time. The southern wing housed the patients as well as the superintendent and several employees. The ages of the patients there were considerably varied. The youngest was age 8, an 8-year-old boy who had been abandoned by his mother.
Oh, God.
At the train station in Clarksburg. She claimed he had been insane since age 3. I mean, that's obviously bullshit.
Right. What the fuck?
And the oldest patient there at that time was 93 years old, so quite the range.
Okay.
The 2-story southern wing was completed in April of 1868, and work on the central part of the facility began immediately. As we stated before, the center part of the building was where the administration and staff would reside. It was also the location of the offices and even an auditorium which doubled as a chapel. And this auditorium, they would hold plays and dances and even indoor sports in the winter. Sometimes plays would be put on by visiting artists, but most often they were put on by the patients. My source makes a point of pointing out the irony that in Victorian times, dancing and acting were frowned upon, as it was thought to lead to mania and dissipation. This can be summed up by a quote from the Reverend D.S. Welling, who was a chaplain at that time at the asylum. Regarding dancing, he said, "It is very proper for lunatics in an asylum to engage in it, though none but lunatics and sick persons should resort to it."
Okay.
There you go. Sounds a lot like the dad from Footloose, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You never know. First you're dancing, next thing you know, you're pregnant.
Absolutely.
Unmarried, no less.
The use of violence was also allowed in instances where self-defense was the only option, and the use of restraints could only be approved by a physician. However, since the staff would soon be so outnumbered by the patients, they would often have to take these actions without prior approval. And soon, here, we will dive into the awful treatments the patients had endured. But before we get there, life for the staff was made a bit easier in 1890 when the electricity was installed at the facility, and they no longer had to rely on oil lamps or gas lighting. And in 1892, elevators were installed, which eased a lot of burden as well. That same year in 1892, the ugly wooden fence that surrounded the property was replaced with wrought iron fences and ornate archways that gave the place a more appealing, elegant look.
Okay.
At least from the outside, of course.
Mm-hmm.
In the fall of 1899, the asylum was met with scandal when Superintendent W.E. Strathers was brought before a government board of inquiry in regard to some serious charges against him. Whereas the prior superintendents, like Dr. Thomas Camden and the other one, I believe his name is Bland, Dr. Bland, they were often accused of paying too little attention to the patients, while Dr. Strathers was accused of maybe paying too close attention.
Oh,
Among the accusations were that he had had inappropriate relationships with 2 female employees, one of whom was a former patient.
Oh.
Both women had attempted suicide.
Oh, my God.
Mary Somerville was one of them. She was a former patient. She claimed that Strathers had entered into her bedroom on the 4th floor late at night, making unwanted sexual advances and asking her to become his pet.
Ew.
The other was Nurse Harriet Green, who was apparently taken on a trip to St. Louis with Strathers so he could sleep with her while they were there. Nurse Green even bought her own train ticket there, pretending to be Mrs. Strathers. But Strathers had devious defense attorneys, and they brought in a bunch of witnesses, mostly asylum employees, to testify on his behalf.
Classic.
They claimed that both women were known to have bad reputations.
Mm-hmm.
It was said that Mrs. Somerville was known to be promiscuous, and it was known that she had gotten pregnant out of wedlock a number of years earlier, so of course in those days that was greatly looked down upon.
Yeah.
So that kind of didn't help her case, even though that's obviously we would know that doesn't mean shit today.
It's
back
just
then
irrelevant.
it was just,
yeah.
Strathers was cleared of all charges, but this only infuriated the prosecutor who had charged him. He claimed that in any other courthouse, Strather would have been found guilty, and that all the witnesses that had come in to testify on his behalf under oath were part of a large scheme by the board assembled by the governor to protect his image. And while the court may have thrown out the charges, the court of public opinion saw differently. The asylum was bombarded by a flood of angry letters from the locals. To save face, the board asked Strathers to resign, and at first he refused, but when the board threatened to have him fired, he did step down.
Yeah.
By the turn of the century, the asylum housed well over 1,000 patients, and new structures were being built to manage the overflow. In 1897, a 3-story structure was built to house male patients, and an entire building was erected in 1902 simply for the mountains of laundry that many people in one place would accumulate.
Mm-hmm.
A new dining room and kitchen were built, and the dining room could hold about 900 people at a time, far beyond the original Kirkbride ideal. And of course, post-Civil War, they began to get more and more patients who were people of color. And of course, their quarters were made separate, and of course, most funding went to white patients. So that was an added layer of bullshit on top of the patients there who were people of color. Were already, that place was a shithole to begin with, but they got the even shittier end of the stick. And if I remember correctly in my sources, like a lot of the labor building the place was done using slave labor, all this stuff. So already you're building a groundwork of just bad nastiness.
Yeah.
It's just in the atmosphere. Now buckle up, because we are about to dive into some of the horrific treatments and practices that patients underwent. And just a heads up, this includes very brutal stuff such as genital mutilation, electroshock therapy, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So just buckle up. In the aftermath of the Civil War, morphine addiction was rampant. In fact, at the time, morphine addiction was often referred to as the army disease.
Oh.
Physical and emotional dependency on drugs was not well understood, so when a wound would be healed up, the access to morphine would abruptly stop, which would often induce psychosis in many former soldiers.
Okay.
Ironically, though, many patients at the asylum would be treated with morphine. A lot of these former soldiers who went there, they're being treated by the same thing that kind of put them there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Morphine would be given to sedate patients, whether to help them sleep or simply just to get them under control. When that didn't work, they were even given alcohol to calm them down. Laxatives were often administered to purge patients' systems, and tonics used to restore strength. And hold on for this. At the time, a large portion of those admitted to the asylum and other mental health facilities elsewhere were due to sex-related issues. Examples would include, quote, immoral life and nymphomania.
Oh, God.
Masturbation in particular was frowned upon, with many believing that it led to insanity. Many patients were admitted under charges of, quote, self-abuse, excessive sexual abuse, masturbation, and syphilis.
Oh.
There were even a few occasions that people were admitted for, quote, tobacco and masturbation. I have no idea what that means.
Tobacco and masturbation. Okay.
I have no idea what that would even entail. And one of the records even shows someone being admitted for what was called suppressed masturbation, or at least a few people, and even deranged masturbation.
Okay.
There's even mention of one patient who was admitted for apparently masturbating for 30 years straight.
Damn. That's rough.
The stamina.
I mean, at a certain point,
you're going to chafe.
You're going to chafe, and pardon my speech here, but you're just not going to bust.
You're just not going to bust. That's right.
Dang.
Between 1850 and 1880, the majority of medical literature and teachings at that time advocated for the use of surgery to cure masturbation.
Oh, God.
Males who were admitted for masturbation often had their genitals cauterized.
Oh.
And in some cases, they were even castrated.
Oh, Jesus.
For female patients who were there for masturbation, caustic chemicals were often used to sear the genitals. And even hot irons used to cauterize the clitoris.
Oh, my fuck.
Sometimes the clitoris would be removed completely with a procedure called a clitoridectomy. By the end of the 19th century, doctors began to turn away from these types of procedures in favor of physical restraints. Often the patient would be tied or they would be fitted with metal mittens that would make it unable for them to masturbate.
Oh.
They would also employ psychological torment as well. For adolescent patients, they were often threatened with genital mutilation if they were ever caught masturbating.
Oh my God.
Awful, just awful stuff. Just really, it like turns your stomach.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
But it wasn't just self-pleasurers that were locked into restraints. It was all sorts of patients. Many were restrained temporarily, while some were restrained permanently. Various methods of restraint included straitjackets, restrictive mittens, being strapped to tables with your legs and arms immobilized. But the most feared of restraints was what was called the Utica crib.
What the fuck?
This consisted of a bed structured sort of like a crib from a nightmare. There was a bed 6 feet long and 3 feet wide with slatted sides. The patient's full body would be strapped down to the bed so that they were unable to move at all. Their hands, legs, and head would be restrained. Then a lid was placed over the bed with spring locks that could only be locked and unlocked from the outside. When the lid was closed, there was barely 12 inches from the patient's face to the lid itself. It was literally like being in a coffin.
Oh my God.
If the patient did not calm down, they would just be left there indefinitely. Men and women often even died in the Utica crib. When a patient was in one of these cribs and they needed to be transported, they would be shipped, crib and all, by train, sometimes for long distances as if they were nothing more than just cargo.
Oh my God. That is so horrifying.
Yes. Hydrotherapy was often employed, and this is to quote my source. This process placed the subject in a hammock suspended in a bathtub with a canvas sheet secured across the top, and only the head emerging above the rim. Patients might stay in the tub for hours or even days, sometimes with bandages around their eyes and ears. There's also what they called needle showers, which is they would just spray someone with, they would take hoses and like high-powered hoses and blast people with ice-cold water.
Oh, God.
There was times where they would wrap people up in these tightly and wet sheets, like tightly. They'd bind them up and then they would just stay there, and as the sheets dry, it would like hurt their skin. Yeah, it was insanity.
Oh my God.
Insanity.
Like, who came up with this shit? Like, how could anyone really think that this was actually helping anyone?
I know. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. It was becoming clear, though, during the latter part of the 19th century that these facilities were not curing those who were deemed insane, but oftentimes making it worse, obviously. Rather than a treatment facility, the asylum was essentially becoming a storage unit.
Right.
For those who were unwanted by society. My source tells of one patient, Isabella Brown, who was committed in 1880, joining 9 of her relatives. At the time, the public was willing to accept this ugly fact as they believed it was better than these folks being free walking around the streets among them. They knew that the situation here, like the environments were awful, but
right.
you know, they felt like it was better than just having them on the street.
Yeah.
To add insult to injury, outside spectators were often welcome to these facilities to gawk.
Oh.
As many of these asylums were terribly underfunded, superintendents would welcome tourists who would pay to come and spend the day at the grounds. They would bring their picnic lunches and play games and speak with the doctors and staff and sometimes even the patients.
What the hell?
I know, it was like a zoo. Insanity.
Like, why would you want to do that?
I know, right?
Why has this always been a thing in human history where it's like,
Right.
You want to watch just like the horrors
Right.
against man. Like
Yeah.
going back to like gladiator times, watching someone just like getting like ripped up by a tiger just like for fun.
Yeah.
To watching like public executions.
Yeah.
And it's like, why does this happen?
Exactly. This was interesting. My source even claims that famed author Charles Dickens would visit asylums when he traveled abroad, as he felt it was the best way to get a sense of the country's character.
Oh,
I thought was very interesting.
yeah.
But as the 19th century came to a close, attitudes about the mentally ill were starting to soften. This doesn't mean things were good, obviously, but things were starting to soften. This was sped up by a number of scandals that hit the papers regarding abuse at these facilities. One story published in the Wheeling Intelligencer in 1884 tells a horrid story about a patient named, their last name was McGuane, who had passed away at the facility. His body was left unattended overnight, and apparently rats ate his face to the point that he was no longer recognizable.
Oh my God.
His family wanted his remains sent home, but this didn't happen. When they came to get the body in person, they were told it had already been buried in the asylum cemetery. Many believe this was done to cover up their negligence.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But keep in mind, though attitudes were changing, like I said, the first half of the 20th century would bring horrors all its own in terms of how patients were treated. This includes the use of electroshock therapy and even the purposeful inducing of seizures,
Oh my God.
because they thought it like cleansed, I don't know, something fucking stupid.
Yeah, it's just like not science-based at all. I can't imagine.
Right. Given the isolated nature of many Appalachian communities, inbreeding was also a big problem.
Yikes.
The asylum saw many patients come in who suffered from mental and physical issues due to inbreeding. West Virginia was even one of the few states that had advocated for the incredibly evil practice of eugenics to stop the problem. The most notorious procedure, of course, though, carried out at the asylum was the infamous lobotomy.
Oh no.
Now, this is where Dylan's gonna get a little hot.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, we've heard just awful, awful shit, but this guy, there's something about him. You just want to punch him in the goddamn face.
Yeah.
Very much a Keith Raniere type motherfucker.
Oh God.
The man responsible for these procedures was a doctor named Walter Freeman. Freeman's father was a doctor, and his grandfather was actually the president of the American Medical Association, so it made sense he would enter the medical field as well. He got his undergrad at Yale and then was accepted into the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, but before finishing his studies, Freeman enlisted in the military when the U.S. entered World War I. His influential family was able to pull strings and have him transferred to the Medical Reserve Corps. He was assigned to the pathology department at Fort Dix Army Hospital in New Jersey. After the war ended, Freeman studied all over the world, Paris, London, and Exeter, and he got his medical degree in 1920. In 1935, he met Portuguese neurosurgeon, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, Egas Moniz. But also, this guy was a piece of shit, so I guess I don't give a fuck if I'm mispronouncing his name.
Yeah, he can fuck off.
He had recently developed a wacky surgical procedure called a leucotomy. It was basically just driving an ice pick into a person's eye socket and penetrating the skull, the purpose of which was to cut the neural connectors in the lobe of the brain. Was essentially what a lobotomy was.
Yeah.
His theory was that by eliminating these neural connections, the brain would be forced to create new pathways, which would essentially create a new and positive emotional state within the patient. He claimed that 5 out of 6 patients saw drastic improvement. Of course, this was almost certainly bullshit. In fact, in 1939, Moniz was writing a prescription for one of his patients whom he had performed the procedure on, when suddenly the patient pulled out a pistol and put 5 shots into this piece of shit.
Yeah, I mean,
But
pop
wouldn't
off
you-
king, truly.
But wouldn't you know it, that fucking cockroach survived.
Ugh, no.
So back to Walter Freeman, his protege.
Okay.
Freeman performed the procedure, a lobotomy, for the first time actually alongside Moniz. The patient was a 63-year-old woman with a long history of mental illness. Having been in and out of institutions for over 20 years, her husband agreed to the drastic procedure. First, they cleaned and shaved the woman's scalp. Then they marked a spot just between the bridge of the nose and the eye socket. The ice pick was then inserted and manipulated in an arc motion, which severed the connections in the frontal lobe. The procedure took about an hour. After 2 weeks of observation, the woman returned home. Her husband reported that though his wife seemed childlike at times, She was no longer agitated or panicky.
Jesus.
Like, how awful. Essentially made zombies.
Yeah, just like, I mean, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's so fucking horrifying.
In 1948, Edward F. Reeser, who was a friend and former colleague of Freeman's, had become a director in West Virginia's state mental system. Due to overcrowding and underfunding, Reeser was desperate and he asked Freeman to come and perform the procedure at the asylum. Freeman saw this as a great opportunity and happily accepted. By 1952, just 4 years later, Freeman had performed 787 lobotomies.
So 4 years later?
Oh, but get this. 225 of which were performed within a 12-day period.
Oh my God.
In the entire U.S., it's believed that over 40,000 lobotomies were performed. But thanks to the bastard Dr. Freeman, West Virginia had by far the highest rate of lobotomies per capita in the country.
Jesus Christ. What a monster.
Truly, a piece of shit, like a monster. Let's further paint you a picture of what an asshole Dr. Freeman was. His partner and co-lobotomizer, Dr. Watt, had grown deeply disgusted by Freeman for both his lack of concern for patients' well-being and his huge fucking ego.
Oh God, of course.
He truly thought he was hot shit, and that history would see him as a visionary. Freeman loved being photographed while performing the procedure.
Oh, psycho.
Once, while in the middle of lobotomizing a female patient at the asylum, he turned to pose for a photo like a fucking chode, and the ice pick broke off in the poor woman's head.
Yeah.
He also didn't give a shit about being sanitary, and my source says he treated patients as if they were cadavers. He never washed his hands or his tools.
What?
Yeah.
That was going into someone's brain.
Disgusting. He would just keep his tools in his pockets of his street clothes, in case they came in handy.
I mean, this is like real evil.
Like, truly, this is like true evil.
Yeah.
Freeman's most infamous failure was that of Rosemary Kennedy.
Oh, yeah. I was going to mention her.
Rosemary was the daughter of Joseph Kennedy, then the U.S. ambassador to England, and she was the sister to future President John F. Kennedy. It was said that Rosemary was often emotionally unstable and would have these unpredictable outbursts in public. And of course, the Kennedys being an influential family in politics, they were afraid that Rosemary would be an embarrassment to their dynasty. At the age of 23, Rosemary was lobotomized by Dr. Freeman, and the results were disastrous. Rosemary would spend the rest of her life hospitalized. Freeman was eventually discredited by the medical community and lost his license to practice medicine. According to my source, Freeman spent the rest of his life trying to redeem himself, traveling all over the country to find former patients he had lobotomized to prove that he had made their lives better. In 1972, Freeman died of colon cancer at age 76. Now, there is so much more about this guy that I didn't even include that he probably deserves his own episode.
Yeah.
He's just a psycho motherfucker.
Yeah.
Truly a psycho. Truly.
Just evil. Just
Evil.
true, like, walking evil.
In the truest sense. So think about this. You've had slavery here at this location, the use of slave labor, and then even post-emancipation, you had patients who are people of color obviously getting the short end of the stick when it comes to treatment and funding and shit like that.
When it already was absolutely disgusting and
Right.
horrifying for white patients.
Exactly, when it was already rough enough. Right. Then just the general treatment of all the patients in general.
Yeah.
Then you add this motherfucker. So it's no wonder folks say this is one of the most haunted places in the country, if not the world.
I mean, with all of this suffering happening in one place.
Yes.
We've talked about energy kind of penetrating the walls of a place, and it doesn't always necessarily have to be like a physical building, just like it gets into like the soil of the place, and it's just like in the ether.
Truly.
And it's just horrible.
Truly. Murder, and even more so suicide, were frequent problems at the asylum. My source tells of 2 patients who lured another patient into a secluded room, and 2 of them would take turns using a sheet to strangle this guy to the point where he was about to die, then they would stop.
Oh my
Well,
God.
all of a sudden they realized, wait a second, we're probably gonna get in trouble. He's gonna tell on us. So they lifted up one of the beds, these metal bed frames, and put his head underneath the foot of one of these metal foots of one of the beds and jumped on the bed until the metal bed frame pierced his skull and killed him instantly.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That is so...
It just makes you just so... It's so...
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah. On another occasion, after several complaints about a foul odor, the body of a patient was found stuffed under a bed. I guess another patient had been annoyed by this man snoring and killed him.
Oh my God. And that just shows like the lack of accountability in the place. Like they didn't even notice that one of their patients was missing until people were complaining of a smell.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like there's no like good record keeping or like attendance taking or it's just like, it's insane.
One time a nurse went missing.
Oh no.
Everyone assumed she had just had enough of the madness and quit and just left without telling anyone. It wasn't until 2 months later they found her body at the bottom of an unused stairwell. Because keep in mind, this place is huge and they were always building it. So there were parts that were unused. So like she was like down at the bottom of the stairwell for like 2 months.
Oh my God.
The book repeatedly mentions how the entire place smelled like shit.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you got dead body smell, it probably just mixed in with the general...
You don't even notice it,
You know what I mean?
That is so horrifying. Did they know what, like, happened to her?
The source doesn't go into if like, she was thrown down or strangled. Yeah, they didn't go into detail. But obviously the fact she got murdered is horrible. But then the fact she went for 2 months without getting noticed is just like fucking clown school.
Yeah.
Most often, patients who took their own lives hanged themselves with bed sheets. This even included Isabella Brown, the woman we mentioned earlier. She was the one who went there and joining her 9 family members. Some were able to use rusty bed frames to cut themselves. And even one mention of a patient who was somehow able to sneak in gasoline and, of course, poured it on himself and lit himself on fire.
Oh my God.
Many were able to use stairwells and open windows to leap from. There was an elderly woman who had been at the asylum for like countless years, but she had been responding well to treatment. In fact, for the last 20 years, she was even allowed to work part-time in town.
Oh.
Well, when the asylum was announced to close and the woman was told she would soon have to leave, she burst into tears saying she didn't want to go because this was her home.
Yeah.
While she claimed she had no family, she actually did have a daughter in California. The daughter sent her mother a bus ticket and a new pair of clothes. A few days later, the daughter called the asylum upset, saying her mother had arrived in the same dirty old clothes she had always worn and not the new clothes she had been given. She had a jacket in particular that she was very fond of, and when she wasn't wearing it, would like work endlessly on it, like mending it and, you know, tailoring it and adding things to it. The daughter thought, you know, it was gross and threw it away. Well, staff at the asylum told her to go fetch the coat from the garbage, which she did. And upon closer look, the daughter found her mother had sewn thousands of dollars into the coat, just like over her time there.
Wow.
Yeah, so thank God she got the fucking coat.
Jesus. Oh my God. That's crazy.
Yeah. And there was one story about a guy, it was his last day. He was getting ready to leave. It was his last day and he hung himself. Like what? It's just these awful...
you hear about that kind of stuff happening. It's like it's the only world they've ever known, and it just feels so daunting and impossible to live on your own or to live without that routine or whatever it may be, you know, no matter how horrible it is.
Right, exactly.
It's really sad. As
the 20th century progressed, so did people's attitudes towards mental health. Advances in psychology and medicine made huge breakthroughs as well. By 1980, there were less than 1,000 inmates in the asylum, and by 1990, only a few hundred. And most of these were actually being treated for like chronic alcohol and drug abuse. They weren't necessarily like mentally unstable. Like they were unstable because of their addictions, but not like what you would think of as, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Various court cases would expose the corruption and abuse at these facilities. In 1987, the asylum itself officially closed. The few remaining patients were transferred to the William R. Sharp Jr. Hospital, which was recently built nearby and finished in 1994, which is when they finally even though it was officially closed in 87, they still used the building till 94 until this other place was built.
Wow, that's like not that long ago.
Yeah. One of the last remaining patients was actually that killer who killed the guy with the bedpost.
Oh, wow.
He spent the rest of his life after being transferred at Sharp's Hospital, dying there in 2011.
Wow.
Between 1864 and 1994, approximately 20,000 people died at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum.
Oh my God, just that many people died?
Died.
Wow, I thought you were going to say that's how many people were treated there.
Yeah, died.
Whoa.
Those who died were buried in cheap coffins and buried without any sort of ceremony. There was also no names on the graves to identify them, just numbers carved onto rows and rows of concrete markers. In 1994, when the Department of Health and Welfare took over the asylum, maintenance crews, wanting to make it easier to mow the grass, pulled up all the markers and threw them aside, and over time, they've all vanished.
Oh, God.
So you just have nameless bodies.
Yeah.
Thousands upon thousands of nameless bodies, just under the earth with no indication they were ever there.
Jesus Christ, that is bleak.
So now, let's jump into the paranormal portion of the episode.
Okay, here we go.
Of course, we have established that this place was absolutely hell on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, all that we've told you about the history of the place, it's nowhere near complete. If you wanted a true idea of the horrors that actually happened here, I'd have to literally just read the book word for word to you.
Right.
Insane. Absolutely insane. Given the years and years of misery, it's no surprise that many tales of hauntings are attached to the place. First of all, there's been a long-running legend that the building itself was built using ancient Masonic designs.
Oh.
And that the stones were actually imported from Europe. Keep in mind, not only was the building itself huge, but it sat on several acres of land. And this is going to sound like a joke, and it's not even a joke. Apparently, it sits on exactly 666 acres.
Oh, fuck. Is that true?
True. That is absolutely true.
Oh my God.
How fucking wild is that?
Why did that happen? Just add another acre or take away an acre.
I know, right? It is said when inside the building today, one can hear moaning, screaming, and crying echoing through the halls, as well as the sound of gurneys being wheeled around and chains rattling and footsteps. Visitors often report feeling cold spots and being pushed or even shoved by invisible hands. The fourth floor is said to be where the activity is at its strongest. It is here that several entities have been reported, such as shadow figures and even a sort of demon dog.
Oh.
One of the most reported ghost sightings is of a little girl named Lily. Something I hadn't mentioned in the episode yet was that there was also an orphanage at the asylum for a time. Because, as you can imagine, a lot of patients come that have kids. Doesn't mean the kids are necessarily mentally ill, but they need, remember Waverly Hills Sanatorium, it was meant for people with TB, with tuberculosis. And they had an orphanage because a lot of the people would die and they would leave their children without parents.
Oh my God.
As the legend goes, Lily grew up at the asylum among the patients. She spent much of her time in the children's playroom that had been set aside from the rest of the asylum. It was here that she actually tragically died at a young age. It is said she is most often encountered in the corridors leading to the part of the asylum where the most violent patients were held. It's said she's always looking for her mother. They say her spirit is very playful and can often be heard giggling and will brush past visitors as she runs by, sometimes poking them for fun. But on other occasions, it's said you can hear her crying and wailing somewhere in the dark corridors of the massive facility. A Civil War soldier named Jacob is occasionally said to be seen walking the halls of the facility. He was murdered by his roommates during his stay. A very well-known spirit said to be encountered often is the ghost of a man named Jim James. They're not really sure who Jim was in life, but it seems as though he loved him some cigarettes.
Oh, James. Okay, loving cigs.
When paranormal investigators are visiting, they will often offer Jim cigarettes in exchange for him doing something to show that he's there. During tours, they will often place down a flashlight and tell Jim that they will give him cigarettes if he turns on the light. He doesn't always do it, but he does it frequently enough that it can't be ruled out as just a faulty flashlight.
Yeah, interesting that it happens some of the time and not all the time. That almost makes it more believable to me.
Right.
You know, that it's not like every single time we do this it works. It's that where it's like that's a little unbelievable, but it's like
right.
You know, if the variables if they're all aligned.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't know.
The ghost of Lily is said to sometimes communicate this very same way. Journalist Marissa M. Cascino went on one of these tours and said this in an article published in the Washingtonian. Julia and I set up in a room allegedly haunted by a spirit named Jim James. We placed a mag light on the floor and asked Jim to turn it on. The light was Julia's, but I inspected it and it seemed totally ordinary. A few beats passed, and then it came on by itself. I offered Jim a cigarette to turn it back off. It went dark. I don't smoke, but our guide gave me a couple of cigarettes because she said some of the spirits liked them. We tried the flashlight trick again and again in a room where Lily supposedly plays, in a pitch-black corridor once reserved for violent women in a lobotomy recovery area, without luck. Even so, exploring the crumbling building and learning its history were so plenty thrilling, ghosts or no ghosts.
Yeah, it's so interesting how places like this hold on to so much of what happens around them. And this one really did remind me of the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, but like, not that wasn't horrific what happened to everyone there, and like just the living conditions and the way the bodies were handled and everything like that. But here it's just like there's so much human suffering that was done by other humans.
Right, truly.
Like that other people inflicted on others, that I feel like that's so much, there's more evil to that. It's not random. Like these people, like some of them were truly violent people, like the guy that killed the other inmate. Some of these people were violent and scary and fucked up individuals that like should not have, you don't really feel as bad for them for living in a place like this. But like there must have been, I mean, the majority of the people there were probably non-violent or were just safe to be around, and that they were just misunderstood. Right. And some of them maybe didn't even really have what we would consider today to even be mental illness.
Exactly. Absolutely. I mean, God, for just people going in for just being like lazy or just jerking off too much.
Yeah.
Also, I guess today it's like there's a bunch of shops and a few museums in the building. Mm-hmm. The place is still used. But they use it more to like commemorate things. I think it's now like a national park. Like the grounds are used for like, because it's like big, huge grounds and whatnot. There was times when like, because the auditorium is so huge, even when there was patients there, they would hold like proms and stuff.
That's so weird. Could you imagine that?
Like the patients wouldn't be anywhere near them, but it was just interesting to think like, somewhere in the building there's like, seems like recipe for a horror film.
Yeah, for real. That is so weird.
Yeah, just awful stuff, Maureen.
But there are some, if you're interested in this episode today, you know what? There are some great ghost hunting shows out there.
Oh, yeah.
Where they visit this place. We've got whatever Jack Osborne's show is called.
Oh, yeah. Portals to Hell, Ghost Adventures, Conjuring Kesha. Kesha went there.
Yeah.
This is a
so you know it's good.
Ghost hunters. I mean, it's all of them it's a staple, friends.
Yeah, so if this was interesting to you, feel free to go ahead and check any of those out.
Destination Fear's another one. Yeah, lots of it. Well, let me tell you something. I got a list of lunatics.
Oh, gosh.
Who should be committed to the Creep Street Penitentiary.
Yeah, at the Creep Street Penitentiary.
It's a good time.
It's a good time.
It's a good time.
We got a lot of really nice doctors.
That's right.
We got a lot of couches.
Oh, yeah.
We hang out, we watch movies.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty good.
Folks, give it on up for our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream, James Watkins, the Finnish Vase Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Jeong, the Ghoulish Gerd Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, and the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer.
Whoa. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful, fantastic Patreon subscribers. Especially a special shout out to our top tier, but we love all of our Patreon subscribers. We could not do this without you, and we love all of you for being listeners here today.
Thank you for making 2022 such an awesome year. Let's make 2023 the biggest and best year yet for Creep Street. You guys are what makes it wonderful.
So please let us know what you would like to see in the upcoming year from Creep Street. If you have any suggestions of episode topics, of things you'd like to see on the Patreon, really anything, just let us know. We are here for you, and we want to make this year just top dollar, baby. And thank you all so much for all of your kind words lately and wishing us a happy holiday. We wish all of you a happy holiday. We hope you had a great Christmas. If you celebrate, happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy solstice, happy having some time off of work, or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
Just thank you. And
Yes.
we appreciate it.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.